I am Michelle Calloway. I am the chair of the board of directors for the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. Before we get started with this great panel, I want to we welcome you to go on camera. We love that. President Williams loves this platform because he likes to see everybody. So please feel free to turn your camera on. Second of all, we welcome great greetings and so forth in our chat room. And also, because this is a panel, put your questions there. If time permits, we'll be able to share some of those questions with this panel. Last but not least, we want you to put us on your social media platforms, and we ask you to put hashtag NAREB 73 for our 73rd convention, first of its kind on the virtual platform. At this time, I bring our 31st president, Mr. Donnell Williams, to bring you greetings to this session. Again, good afternoon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you so much, and I appreciate all of you being on this call, because now we're going to get down into the nitty gritty with some of my favorite folks here. Is Dr. Vanessa Perry all hooked up? Is she here? Or do I need to get up a little time?
She's not in yet, so we're going to go ahead while she starts trying to come in.
Oh, is that you telling me I can't slip in a few words? Is that what you're doing then?
Well, she's not in yet, so I mean she can't hear you. So yeah.
Okay.
But you can speak on her because she's coming in.
Without further ado, we will not hold it up. I will not belabor the time. I appreciate everybody's time and you being here. We have some great speakers now talking about closing the racial wealth gap. I had already mentioned to you some of the programs and initiatives that my administration has put forward and has proven to be successful. The Black home ownership rate when I took office was 40.6%. We've had the largest growth jump since 2004 as far as Black home ownership in this year. Okay, so it went up to 47%. Second quarter, and now it dipped down. Pandemic, I get it. It only went down 0.6%. So now we're at 46.4, but we were at 40.6. We did a tremendous job. My administration did what it needed to do to be the leaders for Black home ownership. So we are very excited to have this panel. And without further ado, I will let me see, hand it back over to Ms. Calloway so she can introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really appreciate it. As Mr. President did share, it's so important that this panel we put together, first panel of several that you will have this week, this next 7 days to be offered. And so the empowerment panel, we have brought together experts, and we will examine both historical and current barriers around wealth building in Black America. You know, if we don't understand where we come from, we're going to repeat the past, and the past is not good. So we have to talk about that a bit, but we have to also talk about where we are today in relation to that. And then as we move forward, where we need to go. So we will examine real estate ownership, life insurance, employment, coupled with government policy. See, we understand that we have to connect the dots. We understand that we have to collaborate. We understand that we need to take all the balls out the air and land them. And we have to make sure that we're pushing forward those governmental policies that impact us. So I want you to understand who we have on this panel and what they bring to us and why they are subject matter experts that we want to hear from today. First, I would like to introduce and just give us a little wave so they know who you are, Sean D. Rochester. All right. He is the CEO of Good Steward LLC, a financial education and advisor company. He is an expert in identifying and optimizing and allocating cash flow and has helped his clients increase their projected retirement assets by tens of millions of dollars. I said tens of millions of dollars. A former corporate development and global strategy executive, he has executed $500 million worth of transactions and helped to generate over $10 billion of incremental revenue and cash flow. He has his Bachelor's of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University of Rochester. He has a master's degree in business administration from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business with a focus on accounting, financing, and entrepreneurship. The Black Tax is part of the Good Steward Financial Empowerment Series, which includes CPR for the soul, how to give yourself a 20% raise, eliminate your debt, and leave an inheritance. I said inheritance for your children's children. Mr. Sean D. Rochester. Next, we have Mr. Eugene Mitchell. If you would give a little wave so we know who you are. Mr. Mitchell is the president and CEO of E. Mitchell Enterprise, LLC, a financial consulting and service. Eugene Mitchell is the president and CEO of Mitchell Enterprise. Oh, we said that, I'm sorry. He is also the author of the book, Closing the Racial Gap, 7 Untold Rules for Black Prosperity and Legacy. Prior to starting his company, Eugene spent nearly 2 decades as a corporate vice president and an African-American market manager at New York Life Insurance Company, which is a position that wasn't even there. He created that position. He was responsible for developing and executing the company's national recruiting, sales, and marketing campaigns within the African-American community. He also oversaw and supported the development, retention, and promotion of 1,500 plus African-American market agents and managers. So he made substantial headways within the insurance industry that before him did not exist, and created initiatives to bring more people that look like us into the business to properly advise us. And he sure shared a wealth of information with me the other day. Next, we have Andre M. Perry. Please wave.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Okay, good afternoon. Mr. Perry is a fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings. He's a scholar in residence at American University and a columnist for the Hetchinger Report. He is the author of the new book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. Perry is a regular contributor on MSNBC and has been published by the New York Times, The Nation, The Washington Post, The Root, and CNN.com. Mr. Perry has also made appearances on CNN, PBS, National Public Radio, NBC, and ABC. His research focuses on race and structural inequality, education, and economic inclusion. Mr. Perry's recent scholarship at Brookings has analyzed Black majority cities and institutions in America, focusing on valuable assets worthy of increased investments. I apologize if you hear any noise. This is the only thing about virtual. I'm sorry. And last but not least, do I have Dr. Perry on, Dr. Vanessa Perry on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you. Thank you. Vanessa Gail Perry, MBA, PhD, is a professor of marketing and strategic management and public policy. She's an associate dean for faculty and research at the George Washington University School of Business. Her research examines consumer welfare and public policy interventions in housing and mortgage markets. In 2016, Professor Perry was appointed as senior advisor for housing to the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. She also previously served as an expert at the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Before joining the faculty at GWU, Professor Perry was a senior economist at Freddie Mac. She holds a BA from the American University, an MBA from Washington University in St. Louis, and her PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Miss Perry, Dr. Perry, PhD, Vanessa Gail Perry, our female on the panelists, you know, I have to call our sisters out, is also the lead author for State of Housing in Black America. I know that Mr. President was waiting for you to come on camera because he wanted to say something to you. So, Mr. President, you may now, then we can go on with the panel.
Wanted to give a special shout out, and I wanted to just say thank you for working with me, my administration, with the entire NAREB family, and that I just have so much gratitude for you. You did an excellent job, and we worked well together, and I thank you so very, very much. We all owe you a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to work on the Sheba report and to be invited into the NAREB family. It's been awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to go ahead and jump on in. As I said, we're going to explore and examine historical as well as current barriers. And so our first question to the panel, and I will direct this first to Dr. Perry. What are the two driving forces behind the racial gap in the U.S. as you see it?
Only two?
Yeah, just two for today.
Try to keep it to two. But I'll say sort of the history of racism and discrimination across markets. So that's one. I know I'm cheating, but that's one, because this racism has affected both education and employment opportunities, access to capital, access to both financial and social capital, access to housing, disparities in criminal justice and healthcare access. And so I will put those all together as the number one cause of the racial wealth gap. The second part is essentially the intergenerational aspect of the wealth gap, which is caused by the structural and historical racism that I referred to. So those are our top two, and I would, if I had to name others, they would all sort of trace back to those two.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell.
Yes, ma'am. It's an honor and pleasure to be with you all today. When I think of that, I bucket them into two areas. First, historical factors. So I'm going to cheat as well. Historical factors being, of course, slavery, Jim Crow, discriminatory lending practices, mass incarceration, the GI Bill, all those things that systemically and through the government were put in place to purposely keep wealth from being created in the Black community. The second part to this, I would say, would be the current contributing factors. And with that, I think of home ownership. Obviously, at 72% versus the 40, I think 3% it is now. We're not participating at the same rate in home ownership, in annual medium income between our jobs and bringing what we're bringing into our families, right? The unemployment rate, the college graduation rate, and not only the college graduation rate, but also the skills and trades that we participate in. And I think the fifth area under that second bucket, I would say would be the family support and inheritance. I think from the industry that I come from, I've seen tens of billions, I think possibly hundreds of billions transfer into families and communities with the tool of life insurance in ways that we don't utilize in the Black community. And so I would say for me that there's those two areas that are the contributing factors. And then to fix that, I would say we need two things as well: systemic change to change the historical pieces, and then personal action for us to take on what we can do for ourselves to change those other buckets areas.
Thank you so much. Mr. Rochester.
The primary driving factor is what I call the Black tax, which is the financial cost of discrimination against Black people that's driven by conscious and unconscious anti-Black bias stemming from individuals, institutions, and corporations. That goes back from the period of about 1619 to emancipation in terms of the uncompensated labor extracted from millions of Black people. And that's just part of the cost. There's costs, on top of that. That's in the order of, approaching $50 trillion, depending on, what research you look at. We're also talking about the extension of that practice through the Jim Crow period, which is important for people to understand how nefarious and elegantly designed that was to continue the extraction of economic resources. Slavery, by definition, is a 100% tax on all your earnings, right? Nothing that you possess is yours, not even you or yours. There's a continuation of that extraction over the course of that period from about 1870 to 1945 or 1950 or so. That's another $50 trillion. And then you have how that emanates itself in education through separate but equal, and through the elimination of Black participation into the massive investments into creating the current, property middle class, right, in America, which never existed. And that's on the order of $44 trillion invested into basically, white America to create what we know as the middle class. Less than 2% of those resources went to Black people. So it's saying, what everybody else is saying, but we just need to make it more concrete and put numbers next to it so people can understand the scale, right, in a language that they kind of speak every day.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Andre Perry.
Yes, the other Dr. Perry.
Yes.
Thank you for the question, Madam Calloway, and I also want to thank President Williams and Executive Director Thompson for giving me this opportunity. And I mean, just to add a little nuance to all the absolutely correct things that have been stated, I'll say that what's also driving this wealth gap is that we actually have a lot of assets, but they are devalued. My research in the area of devaluation shows that when we do own homes and we do own businesses, we're just not getting the same kind of return as others. So, and I'm sure I'll talk about this later, but my research in the book, Know Your Price, shows that homes in Black neighborhoods compared to white homes in white neighborhoods, after controlling for education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics, are underpriced by 23%, about 48,000 per home. Accumulatively, that's about 156 billion in lost equity. And we know that's the money people use to invest in other things, either education, their own businesses, to move to another neighborhood. And so certainly everything everyone said is absolutely right, from historic, from slavery to Jim Crow racism to the Black tax. The only thing I can add is that they're also devalued. And I will just add one other significant factor in that when you look at Black wealth, what our holdings are that contributes to the wealth that we have, it is very concentrated in housing and in businesses. And so, but there are other ways to build wealth, and we're generally absent in those. I won't even talk about the stock market. I won't talk about benefits. I won't, there's a lot of things there. I'm sure some of our panelists are much more articulate in those areas. But our main wealth drivers are really in two areas, and not in these others. So we do need to have a conversation around wealth. And I know this sounds controversial in this form, but we do need a conversation about wealth that goes beyond housing as well.
Yep.
Well, even though this is the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, we do recognize that that is one aspect of wealth building. And you're absolutely right, and exactly why we even have Mr. Mitchell here today, because that is essential. And so what the running line that I heard from everyone, each one of you spoke about Jim Crowism. And, we take that back fundamentally, and then how it continues to manifest. And I think that just briefly, and this is not, a question necessarily for everyone, but someone can chime in so that our guests know and understand when we talk about, what Jim Crow has started out and how it manifests into mass incarceration and, the withdrawal of us having ownership, and then maybe manifest into things like redlining, how that does affect our ability to move this forward. So if you all could make it a little plain for everybody on here that they can understand that impact of that slavery, that Jim Crowism on up to today, real briefly, anyone can jump in with that if they would like to do that for me.
I can jump in. It's a big topic. I'll try to net it as much as I can. You have post-emancipation, people are leaving that institution with little or no economic resources. If you go back to 1870, Black people own about 0.17% of US wealth. We also have to understand that the institution of slavery was producing raw cotton, which was 61% of all US exports and 80% of the global cotton market, and 20 million people around the world were involved in that, and 1 million of those people lost their jobs. It puts the whole world in a global cotton famine, and they're crying out, what's America going to do to put these newly freed people back to work? The response to that is not a capital infusion through land, and that augmented by a mule, hence the 40 acres and a mule. It is that the land confiscated in the South is given back to the white power structure. The large mega plantations are broken down into much smaller lots. Black families agree to settle on those lots and plant cash crops, bring those crops to market. They share in a portion of that. That's literally where the name comes from. The problem is all the terms and conditions. It's a contract. It's a labor contract. All the terms and conditions are set by the white farmer. There is an implicit 100% tax on those folks' labor because they don't have the resources that they need to bring the crops to market. They have to borrow all of it: food, clothes, shelter, seed, tools, everything, at rates as high as 70%, per year over the course of that time. So the white farmer is setting their cost structure. When they bring it to the market, that is the white farmer who tells them what it's worth. He's setting their revenue. By definition, if you control somebody's cost and their revenue, you control their profit. That's where the 100% tax comes into place. If you are not amenable to this and you don't want to do it, you have to deal with the fact that you have vagrancy laws that say if you're not a property landowner and if you're not gainfully employed, you can be charged with a criminal offense, put in a state or county jail. If you sign a contract and you break it, you have to deal with contract enforcement laws, which they will charge you with a criminal offense, put your state or county jail. And if you go to jail, then you have to deal with the convict leasing, in which they will lease you back out to the same white farmer or private corporation that you didn't want to work for. And then, of course, if you object to any of these things, you do so upon the pain of death, because there's a 1 in 2 chance of death under the construct of convict leasing. It's extremely lucrative. It's driving about 20% of the sales of the state of Alabama back in 1914. But it's a way to tie Black people to land and tie them to property white landowners and to extract every single nickel out of them. This wasn't a 2 or 3, 4 year period. This thing lasted, for roughly 75 years, during which 4,000 people were publicly executed, Black people, under this construct of lynching. So there was, and nobody's been prosecuted for any of those things. It was a horrific, design that was hermetically sealed. This is not Hollywood where you parachute in and you could have had some other outcome. There was no other outcome. You did that or you paid upon the pain of death. That's a quick version of it.
This is why we need to understand, when you think about what was just said, that from the onset, from slavery into the post-slavery period, and what was the law of the land was not a wealth building scenario, but a debilitating, always in debt scenario. That is the history that's being brought forward. That's in the lineage. And so when we talk about and look at where we are today, and then we see when we talk about governmental policies that have been put in place from then forward to not allow the Black community to own land, to have control the destiny, even in business, and have equal opportunity. We just have to understand that these are not one-off. These things didn't happen today. They didn't manifest in 2020 or 2019. They have a long history. And so we have to continue to stay awake and battle that. I'm going to move on to the next. Thank you so much for that. What should corporations and foundations do over the next 5 years to help close the racial wealth gap in the US? Now, that basic that we've heard about, that's kind of counterintuitive, but here's the question. Here we are today. I'm going to start off with Dr. Andre Perry. I'm going to be in reverse. Dr. Andre Perry and then Mr. Mitchell.
Certainly corporations can do a lot by doing a roll call of their own businesses to see who they're paying and what kind of benefits they have. When you look at some of these corporations, now we won't even talk about Walmart and what they're paying employees, what kind of benefits they have, but you can go to any Fortune 500 company and do a roll call and say, hey, how are you paying? What kind of benefits are your employees getting? And break those down by race. In addition, in the main thing, we need to restore the wealth that's been extracted by racism. Now, you can call it reparations, you can call it stimulus, but at some point, even, I mean, based on a number of studies, we see if Black people saved every cent for the next anywhere from 250 to 370 something years, we would not close the wealth gap. And so you'd still need some infusion, some stimulus in concrete areas. And I'm just going to, because I really want to hear the panelists, I also just want to emphasize two things. When you talk about wealth, you have to talk about assets minus debts. We did talk about the lack of ability to accumulate those assets. But when you can't accumulate assets, when an economic shock hits you, like the one we're in now, guess what you got to do? You got to take on debt. Black people are saddled with more uncollateralized debt. And so things like student loans, hospital bills, credit cards, those kind of things, which if you're a business owner and you don't have the equity in a home, you don't have retirement to fall back on during these times, you got to max out your credit cards. You get sick, you have a hospital bill. So when you look at our wealth and where it falls, you see across the different strata, people saddled with an abnormal, and well, it's normal because we weren't allowed to accumulate wealth, but we have much more uncollateralized debt that prohibits us from growing. And just very briefly, and that's what's really hurting, why we need to look at wealth and not income. We have a lot of people who are middle class in terms of income, if you measure it very rigidly. But many people, including myself, have student loans, have other forms of things that if we had a grandfather who could own a home, we wouldn't have these problems. So again, I say this all the time, there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. That we have a lot of people doing everything required of the American dream, but not getting the return on that investment. And so we need to remove those current structures that's throttling wealth and provide some stimulus so that we can truly have a level playing field.
Thank you. You said a lot when you talked about the income, because we oftentimes think of the income and not equate, we say that's middle class and there's the income, but it's not really an asset. And then our debts are so insurmountable. As you said, if we had property that was lineage to us, it would be a different story. Mr. Mitchell, would you please comment? Do I need to repeat the question or you?
No, that's okay. I was just
Okay.
inspired by Dr. Perry there. I mean, nothing about Black people that racism can't fix. You hit it right there. So many levels. And that's really where I was going to go with my response as well. I think companies and foundations have to be honest about the challenges that the Black folks face. You know, how we got here and what we really need to have happen for us to get ahead. Systemic racism is so ingrained in so much of our world. Right? When you think about those bucket areas of the current contributing factors, when you think about the home ownership rate, when you think about, you know, our access to capital, you think about just sort of our employment opportunities, you know, us getting fair wages and equal wages, that there's so much that companies need to acknowledge and address, that you know, the ability to ascend within companies, right? The ownership and when I come from the insurance industry, when you think about the ownership of independent agencies, which is still only 2% of the industry. When you look at large companies, less than 4% of offices are led by African Americans. You know, they're just giving us opportunity to participate on so many levels, and it's that racism that has kept us out. And it's the lack of acknowledgement of it. You know, the subtle, you know, nature to say that, you know, it's a meritocracy, you know, everybody has opportunity, but until you really delve in and you want to hear what the differences are, but when you're open to hearing what people are saying, that, you know, that they fought and that they'll actually leave companies to go elsewhere because they figure they can't break that glass ceiling. Those are the things that I think that companies need to, and maybe starting this year, to take on. That there's so many factors to this, from your employment within the company, from access to these tools, especially in the financial services industry and banking and business creation and support. That there's so much that we are not privy to. We don't know. We haven't been educated about. That what we do know is either skewed or it's misguided. You know, that we've got the lack of trust on so many issues. Companies have to reestablish trust in so many areas. I think those are the things that when I think about what needs to have happen, you know, for real change. And I know the panelists here with PhDs. I mean, metrics are needed, you know, to help track that and to show progress towards that. And so that's where I would start to answer that question there. But there's so many levels to touch on.
Thank you so much for that. And I would love to go deeper into. I may have time to come back to that one. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go on now to what impact, if any, was the murder of George Floyd having on the efforts to close the racial gap? And I'm going to ask Dr. Vanessa Perry to weigh in on that, and then Mr. Rochester.
So thank you. Thanks so much, Michelle. I think that the George Floyd murder incident sort of shined a spotlight on what the rest of us have been living with throughout our entire lives and over multiple generations. But it was the first time that it actually got played out on the internet, moment by moment, and on TV worldwide. And so now it seems as though people, and the last question was about founded corporations and corporate America and its related entities. It seems as though now people are open to acknowledging discrimination and racism that's occurred in many manifestations since we came to this country. So I think that perhaps now these organizations and these entities may be more open to taking some active steps, and we can stop doing what I consider to be a waste of time, trying to convince people that racism actually exists, and wasting time not just explaining that, but trying to make another kind of case for why steps need to be taken. So typically, you know, we, rather than sort of offending people politically, we find all these other explanations for why we should do, you know, outreach or target the Black community. And these, you know, explanations are things like, well, you know, Black people spend a lot of money, so we should, you know, acknowledge that and we should take advantage of that. No, that's part of it. But the real reason is because it's the right thing to do, because this is supposed to be a country that is based on equality and respect for others and opportunity. And if we don't take active steps against racism and discrimination, part of which is closing the wealth gap, then that's not who we are. And there's really no other reason or rationale that really needs to exist. So back to George Floyd, I'm hoping that eyes are open and that they remain open and people realize the impact of this on everyone in the US if we don't do something about the racial wealth gap.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Rochester.
I see it as what I would call a piercing of the veil, right? What you normally have, people need to understand is systems are defined by what they produce, not what they profess, right? So the U.S. professes, you know, liberty and justice and freedom for all and the ability to, you know, to be upward mobile and all these kinds of things. But then you saw a grotesque public execution in real time during a period of massive economic distress with a global pandemic that is seen all over the world, right? it's jarring. It's like people seeing the dogs attacking children, right? In the 1960s and the fire hoses, so on and so forth. This is the leader of the free world, and this is actually what is happening, right? In the country, and there are people who are defending it. Let us recall that there are many, many thousands of millions of people who didn't see a problem with that, right? So there was a jarring and a shock to the system, and then there was a need to respond to it with people taking to the street, young people across different races and ethnicities joining into those protests, and corporations needing to demonstrate, right, that they are going to be part of the solution. Part of that is engaging in conversation. Part of it is trying to learn more about these racial issues, right? So on and so forth. So it created a moment in time. And by the way, this is only a moment in time where people were open to discussion. I think what is important here, if I could just touch on what corporations should be doing, because they are reacting to this as well, is we have to look at things from an economic framework that I call PhD, right? That I talk about, which stands for purchase, hire, and deposit in ways that create jobs, create and expand business, and provide capital in the Black community. So at the end of the day, the efficacy of your policy plan, program, or whatever should show up in job creation, business development, expansion, and the availability and affordability of capital in the Black community, right? Many corporations are trying to say, well, what am I going to do? Now, the way that this PhD, purchase, hire, and deposit, shows up is the purchase for corporations, institutions, foundations, is what are you doing with your supply chain? You can create tens of thousands of jobs by integrating Black enterprise within your corporate supply chain. The best form of solidarity is economic solidarity. And if you look at supply chain spend to Black businesses in particular, not this minority, diverse, inclusive number that people discuss, it's less than 2%. That's the same with government, whether it's a federal, state, or local level, and across these other institutions. So utilizing the power of their supply chain to do more business with Black business is paramount. The second thing they can look at is utilizing the power of their collective balance sheets, being able to take available cash and put that into institutions that provide liquidity to Black communities. That's Black banks, it's Black credit unions, and it's CDFIs, community development, institutions that are providing liquidity in a focused way to Black people. And of course, it's their hiring, right? What is the proper representation of Black people across their payrolls at meaningful levels? You have the issue of you don't have enough representation, and then you're not compensating them as they should be compensated. There's high levels of underutilization. So there's a lot that they can do, and then they're actually taking a moment to say, what can we show people, right? And the idea is everything that is done, it should be economic, right? It should be specific. These are issues associated with Black experience in America, and it should be scalable, right? Because we're dealing with a problem that's of the size of the Grand Canyon, and people are taking a ladder to address it.
Yes.
And these are the issues that we need to help people really think about. Just real quick, I remember speaking with a large corporation we all know about, and one of the things that they were going to do is make Juneteenth a holiday for everybody, which is great. And I'm like, if that's the only thing that you're going to do, what you're doing is you got a $15 or $1 billion payroll, right? Why don't you divide that by 360? That's what you are funding your full staff, on a daily basis, and then take that and utilize that money to do, better recruitment, development, promotion of Black people within the organization. Use that to bring more Black enterprise into your supply chain, to provide working capital so that they can take on bigger contracts, so on and so forth. Don't just take that money and distribute it to a bunch of people who they can, just kind of take a holiday, right? And not fully understand and appreciate. If that's one of many things you're going to do, then that's great, right? But if that's the only thing that you're going to do, just focus on the economic portion, right? As of April, you guys all heard the statistics, 40% of Black business, 441,000 had to be shuttered, right? At the end of April, I think it was 52% of Black adults were unemployed. Like a holiday is not what Black people need, right? What we need is economic resources in the terms of jobs, business, and capital, policy, plan, program, institution, philanthropy, doesn't matter. Don't come into our communities and not employ the people who are in there and upskill them. You lose the multiplier effect. Don't come in there and not use the services, right, of businesses that are in there. You lose the multiplier effect. And don't forget to use your excess cash and put it into institutions that are trying to have an economic impact in the communities. Otherwise, it becomes more symbolic, and you lose the economic scale.
Thank you so much.
Can I just add a few things?
Yes.
Very
Yes.
briefly. One of the contributions from the uprisings as a result of George Floyd is this notion of defund the police. And why it's important, it really forces us to ask, what's adding value to our lives? You know, we're not going to nonprofit our way out of these problems. Brother Rochester is absolutely right. It's going to take purchasing, hiring, and depositing. And if and brother, I really do need to get that citation, because I'll be quoting you with that phrase. I will be quoting you. But the point of the defund the police phrase is asking us, what areas are truly adding value to our lives? And there's lots of things, not just policing, that's not adding value. We're not getting a return on our investment. And so for me, out of that, we need government to do what it's supposed to do. We need businesses to give our proper return. I mean, the reason why I say there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve, because there's this white supremacist myth that states the conditions of Black cities and neighborhoods are a direct result of us and our behavior. In reality, we're doing a lot. We're starting businesses, we're purchasing homes, and we don't get the value, and it's harder for us to maintain those assets, and it forces us into debt. So for me, we got to be very clear about the assets and the institutions that are truly adding value. And if we're not getting that value, we must eliminate them. I mean, and that's what I think when I think of the summer and George Floyd, it really put that, it gave us the ammunition to say, hey, let's really look at what adds value to our life.
Yes.
And so we need to move from just the criminal justice space to the economic space, because nothing says that a Black person doesn't belong in an economy like a police officer shooting them, or killing them dead in the street.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to pick into that, all of these things, as we said, piercing the veil, this is what happened when in front of our faces, what we've always seen the rest of the world saw. We live it every day, right? The rest of the world began to experience it. And we know that we are, everything you all have mentioned, and I'm running out of time, is so valuable. But before we do conclude, I do want Mr. Mitchell to talk about a little bit about these disparities, these inequities, all the things we've discussed, how that affects our life expectancy, okay? And we've already talked about undervaluing property, but undervaluation of our lives, all right?
So from the 20 years that I've been in the insurance industry, I've seen vast disparities in the value of Black lives. You know, I like to say, you know, I stand, you know, wholeheartedly behind the statement that Black lives matter. But I say that we've got to move that conversation and that movement and message to the next level. I say Black lives matter, but what's a Black life worth? Because if we don't know what we're worth to ourselves, our families, and our communities, then we might not be making the best decisions and have the highest expectations in life, right? Until we understand that we're $1 million assets to ourselves, right? As a young person making $50,000 a year, you do that for 20 years, that's $1 million. That's $1 million that you bring home to your family. And when you don't make it home, or another Black man gets shot or gets put into prison, that's $1 million that's been taken away from his family. Right? That's what, when I think you start that's associating value to what's being taken away, then you can really start to create the impact or share the impact of what's been going on around us. From, like I said, the industry that I came from, the other part to valuing yourself is having protection of that value. The tool that is the biggest one for that is life insurance. And there's so many uses for that. If I don't make it home tomorrow, then at least does my family get that $1 million income, that some kind of supplement for that income through the product that is out there that can make sure that I am replaced economically, right? And there's so many uses to that. This is a product that I believe that if used correctly, if we can change the education around what it is, this has potentially a complementary product for all that you all are doing at NAREB, right? From that $1 million that my family receives today, if I don't make it home, or at some point in the future as I pass away, my children and my great-grandchildren receive it. That's a lump sum down payment that could be used 20% or more to purchase a home, right? That's an amount that can be used to pay past due property taxes. Where I came from in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, I don't know how many homes I saw lost because the family couldn't afford to pay the past due taxes when somebody passed away, right? This is a lump sum that could be used to pay for renovations, especially in gentrifying neighborhoods. And taking it to the next level, collectively, we could pool this now to change neighborhoods and communities around us.
Yes.
At New York Life, I created a campaign to put $50 billion worth of life insurance in force by those 1,500 Black agents for the Black community. The calculation was 200,000 Black people with at least $250,000 of life insurance will create $50 billion of protection, but also tax-free future income as long as we keep those policies in place. And it's a fact of life we're all going to pass at some point in the future. So for the next 10, 20, 30 years, $50 billion could transfer back into the families, the friends, and the businesses of those 200,000 African Americans. And what couldn't they do with $50 billion? Right? You talk about, startup capital for new businesses. You talk about down payments for homes. You talk about supplementing, college educations, cycling $50 billion back into Black-owned businesses, being deposits into banks, creating endowments to charitable giving, the tithing into churches. I think that we talked about, as you said it, connecting the dots and collaborating across industries. I just wanted to, and I was really happy to be here to share where I believe there's, in this conversation of closing the racial wealth gap, we can't let the life insurance industry off the hook. See, they insured slaves 175 years ago. That they, over the years, had race-based underwriting and purposely kept wealth building from the Black community. Today, like I said, that there's still systemic challenges for agents and agencies to be successful. And the Black community still doesn't truly understand the power of this tool. I'm not talking about the burial policy that Big Mama had. I'm talking about watching how other races, religions, and ethnic groups create millions for themselves and their families and billions collectively using this tool. So I don't want it to use up all the time, but I'm fired up and I'm happy to come back and talk more about how we leverage this tool to make a difference.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that just fed into everything else. All of our other speakers we're talking about, we talked about just pretty much we focused in two buckets in terms of building wealth in the Black America. That would be home ownership and maybe small businesses, but we have not crossed over into look at other capacities, as well as when we always talk about systemic racism, right? With how it manifests, even when you said underwriting practices in the area of insurance. And we could go on and on as we become interdisciplinary about what we're talking about. So I really don't want to wrap this up because the chat room is on fire and they would love to hear more from you. But we do have a next panel. We were supposed to lay the framework and the groundwork for the rest of the conference. Let's talk about history. Let's talk about how we see discrimination, how it's been working, how it's moving forward. And now we're going to come with the next panels and start talking about how that might work in terms of, government and in other areas. So we do have to wrap it up. Thank you all for your time. I would invite you to even stay around if you don't have other engagements to listen to the next panel that's coming up immediately. I know that if everyone could unmute and clap for you all can just send clap words inside the chat room for this panel. It was awesome. I'm so certain, and you all know, they're saying it's a great job, fantastic. This panel is just opening up eyes. You broke it down where we could understand it. All of you, just this astute panel. I have no more to say. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being with us and always answering our call. Before we end, I want to bring in President Williams so he can give his last closing remarks, and then we'll take a break for about 5 minutes. Ms. Jill, tell me if that's correct, while we change panels. Mr. President?
Yes, I just want to thank everybody again. Kudos, you guys did a great job as usual. I appreciate the relationship, and I thank you. I don't want to belabor the time, but I want us to try and stay on schedule and get back on track. Mr. Thompson, do you have any housekeeping remarks?
Yes, Mr. Williams, just two things. We really wanted to see this panel in person, but you all brought down the house. And hopefully next summer we can have a part 2 of this where you can have your books and they can feel that energy that they're getting electronically. But thank you all. We want everyone to know we got 5 minutes. We're going to have another Power Pack panel, some titans in the financial and business industry. And text your friends and tell them if they are not on this Zoom call, they are not in the right place. This is where the action is happening in 2020. As my mama would say, we're gonna put our foot in this conference so we can get ready for 2021.